Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura with Connect My Brain. Thanks so much for tuning in. We have been talking about the typical childhood diagnoses, such as attention issues, dyslexia, and then we kind of went into some of those that are falling under more of an emotional canopy, like stress, anxiety. And today I'm going to talk about PTSD. And I want to give some background to PTSD, and then I want to discuss about what to look for in school age and children primarily under 5 and 6 years old. And then I want to talk about what can I do as a healthcare provider for this arena. And so my focus will be more on the art of self-regulation, which is delivered through an incredible therapy known as neurofeedback. And so this one, I think, is a little delicate because there is such a emotional connection primarily with or following incidences of trauma. But it is something that goes on in our world, and children are around when things happen. And I think it's very important for us to continue diving deep into the things that are making children dysregulated, impacting their development, and really having a very far reaching effect into their life long term. So let's start off. Typically, PTSD is when a person experiences a variety of symptoms for at least 1 month following a traumatic event. And this period of time is certainly not limited to a month. It can go on for years. It can even go on for the lifetime of the individual. PTSD joined the diagnostic language in the DSM manual in 1980. And what PTSD was then associated with was something that happened to people that went into war or battle, our soldiers. And what they found was, war is a terrifying event. Individuals that were serving in the military may have experienced horrific events. Let's just think for a minute, what would it be like as a soldier on the front line, bombs coming at you, people being shot and killed, so much death and destruction around you while you might be going through it. Perhaps your adrenals are kind of carrying you through. But for those that are fortunate to come home, it's not always like that because of all the sound stimulation being a special sense, which our special senses supply electrical currents to the brain. This stuff gets deep rooted in there. So imagine here is this individual who has returned home, and they're walking down the street and a car backfires. This could be enough to trigger a flashback, which makes them believe they're right back on the front lines again and literally experiencing what they experienced before. And without the appropriate help, these flashbacks and nightmares and severe anxiety, leading to also uncontrollable thoughts about the event, can literally become a pattern. And without the support of the appropriate help, sometimes that is a very difficult path to break, especially on your own. And I think it would be that for anybody. But what about children? You know, for a long time, I can remember always hearing how resilient children are, as if they don't experience anything. And I think this is not the appropriate way to think about childhood. In fact, from a child's perspective, they can very much too fall into that same pattern of stress, anxiety, PTSD. But because maybe they're so young that they can't even talk about it, maybe they've been threatened, maybe they've seen so much that it's literally pulled them away from even thinking they might know what to do with some of the events that some kids have experienced. I have to pull into this conversation that if you haven't seen the movie Sound of Freedom, I really encourage you to go see it. I think it's part of the inspiration for me to cover this topic. I think more people are opening their eyes and their ears and understanding that things are really happening to our children. And it's not just the Sound of Freedom movie, but anytime adults argue or somebody comes into somebody's neighborhood and gets shot and killed and there's children around, whenever they even witness sexual assault, these have such long-standing critical impacts on children and how they're actually going to be able to develop. So if you haven't seen that movie, Sound of Freedom, by the time this podcast goes out, I don't know if it'll still be in theaters. It is right now, and it has really done a phenomenal job where most people really didn't think it was going to have this type of impact. It has really surprised Hollywood, the media, and it's necessary for us as a culture to know what is going on around us, and then what can we do. And I think that part is a very personal place as to what can we do. And what we can do is what we are called to do individually. Myself, I have been thinking about this for a very long time, even way before the movie came out. But and it is a true story. It's more like a documentary, and these individuals. This movie's actually been put together 8 years ago, and nobody wanted to take it on. And it was Angel Studios, who are also the producers of The Chosen, that stepped up. They have a guild that they put either TV shows or movies in front of, and they decide as a group if they should put their energy towards this. And the percentage typically needs to be above 60. And if I heard correctly, they actually had over 75% of their guild say, well, we've got to get this movie out there. And they actually did it in 1 week's time, which is unbelievable. And it came out 4th of July day. And it has really had an impact on our community to where it is still showing a couple of weeks later. So I do believe that we are opening our eyes and ears. And I have such a passion for children. And I know that they're not as resilient as people think. And I know that they need support. And I know they need strong parents, caregivers, role models in their life. And I've talked about children in every single podcast, so that's never going to change. But it is just so important for us to really pay attention to this. So moving off of the topic of the movie, what else can potentially have such a profound impact on the well-being of children? And one of the ones that is unbelievable when I went and researched this out, and I'm going to share my screen in a second, because what I found blew my mind, that there's really been this many school shootings just this year. And we are only 7 months into the year. So think about what happens when there is a school shooting. Think about the impact on the loss to that family, to the community, to really anyone. Okay, now let me pull this up. I'm not a huge fan of Wikipedia, but I did think this list was very easy for me to pull up. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to show this. So this brings us all the way up. So today for me, it is July 21st, and this is current. So this is July 20th, yesterday. 4 dead after a 3-hour standoff with police. A woman and her 3 children were found dead in a possible murder-suicide. Now, I'm not going to read every single one of them, but if you go over to YouTube when we get this posted, you're going to see this. And I'm just going to scroll through, because I can't even believe that this is truly a stat for 2023. And this many shootings have already gone on, and there's already numerous people dead, numerous children witnessing, being impacted by this type of behavior. And I am still scrolling through the list. I just cannot believe where we are as a country and the amount of trauma and stressful events that are going on. This is an interesting page. This was in January, 52 shootings, 87 dead, total number wounded, including the shooter was 205. February was 43 shootings, March was 40, April 53, May 84, and June 68, for a total so far, not even including July, 340. Wow. So that was a very easy list to pull up. And if you want to check it out, in fact, what I'll do is I will give Marcy my podcast manager. I will give her the link to that, and we will also put it in the show notes. So if you don't want to go over to YouTube, you don't have to. But we've got to stand back and realize that our children are witnessing more violence than we could possibly imagine. And when we start talking about school shootings, now, not all of those were school shootings, but they are mass shootings that are going on, including schools. We have to realize the impact that this is having on a child. And as I say in every single podcast, children are not the same as adults. They cannot process this stuff because their brains aren't even completely mature yet. And therefore, they've only got whatever resources they have in order to try and process. So we know that trauma can lead to really heightened emotional and behavioral reactions. These reactions can turn someone's internal state into chaos and cause them to lose interest, feel afraid, have unsettled emotions, difficulty paying attention, and even difficulty concentrating. We have really been diving in to many of these words like concentration and attention and emotions for the last few weeks as we have been discussing a stress response and then how chronic stress turns to anxiety. And then I would say this leads into PTSD. Now, it's not an automatic shift that anybody that goes through stress and anxiety will automatically go through PTSD. But there are definitely signs that can indicate when you may want to get your child seen by someone in order to make sure that this is either something that can be turned around or perhaps it does need deeper support. When that chaos that somebody is experiencing in a stress response has that tendency to go on and on, almost like a hamster in a wheel, some very detailed points are what you should be looking for. And you want to pay attention to how your child's is responding. Are they describing or acting out unwanted or upsetting memories? Are they telling you that they have nightmares? Or you might even pick up that there's some type of a flashback or heightened emotional distress. It's all going to be determined by the age of the child, their own experiences, and what they're really actually able to describe to you. The main things that are seen with children are avoidances and withdrawal. I've talked about that in so many areas, not even just PTSD. Whenever your child is avoiding something, that is a red flag. Remember, we talked about this in a previous podcast. The primitive or the early response is to go towards or pull away. So when we're children, we are so close to the beginning of our lives. We're going to reach back down into that brainstem. And what that really means is that I'm not going to be able to rely on reasoning potential or reasoning skills in order to go through something. They will really, really rely on the parent, the caregiver, the role model in their life to help them navigate this path. The arousal factor is very important. I've talked about this concept as well. This literally brings us back to the Moro reflex. The Moro reflex is a primitive reflex coming on 9 weeks in the womb, meant to be integrated by 4 months of life. But its number one thing is training, centrally training that little baby about how to become aroused. And what does that mean? That means to wake up. That means to be alert. That means to be able to engage in whatever is going on at the moment. Now, if you're listening, you may be hearing some thunder in the background. We are having a storm here in Atlanta, but I'm going to tell you, I really hope it cools this place down because it's been really, really hot. So if we have an over aroused brain, we are going to be very irritable. We're going to be very angry. We're going to be very edgy. So these are not characteristics only involved in PTSD, but they're very common in children. But again, it typically is surrounding a known traumatic event. You may also really see that there is a dramatic change in the child's school performance, and maybe there's a flatness. In our very young children, their developmental stages influence how they're going to respond to trauma. Their point of reference is completely different than an older child. Their symptoms are not as obvious. Their action and play doesn't necessarily look distressing as we may see in a school-age child, meaning more above the age of 7 and 8. When a younger child does avoid, again, I'm calling that a red flag. Little ones always go towards. If you are, if concern gets elevated in a child under the age of 6, you might see, or it might be related to, that they are withdrawing from people. They're avoiding talking about any event. They avoid activities, anything that may potentially remind them of the event, or they may demonstrate very restricted and rigid behaviors. Now, I do think we've got to be careful because these are very known traits that have been identified in PTSD, but they're also identified in other things like autism. Autism is really known for restricted and rigid behaviors and repetitive behaviors. So I think it's very important that we really keep in mind that when we're talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress